This conference will now be recorded.
So I get to say hello and welcome. And on behalf of the IPBS Board of Directors, and several of our board members will be joining us today. And on behalf of Mark Newman, Executive Director, thank you so much for signing up to be on this webinar. In case you don't know who I am, I'm Barbara Duke Sams, Marketing Manager for IPBS, semi-retired, note semi-retired. This is the last of our webinars for this year. We've actually had 3 other webinars, and so this is the finale. It's the grand finale, I think. There will also be a TV and production staff meetup led by Dottie Krebs from Ball State, and that date is Thursday, December 8th at 9:00 a.m. We moved it around to kind of get out in November because November was so busy. So if you are in TV production, you will be getting an email about that and can RSVP. There are also plans in the works for a corporate development survey, and a meetup will take place after the first of the year for corporate development staff. I will share that we are working on the possibility of an in-person IPBS conference, August 2nd through the 3rd, 2023. And that will be somewhere kind of in Indianapolis, probably north side suburban location, because rooms downtown are so expensive. So today our topic is the evolution of local production. So I'm going to introduce the panel. And panel, if you would just kind of wave. So I want to say hi to Paul from WNIT. And I will share that Paul I said I'd say something nice about everybody, so I'm trying, you guys. He's working on a documentary on my favorite subject, which is basketball. You thought I was going to say chocolate, but it's basketball. Um, Dottie from Ball State PBS, who, by the way, is having some trouble with her audio, so she's using her phone while she's on her computer in case you notice a difference. And I saw her in action at Ball State's Happy Little Fest, and man, she works hard. So, and she's very talented. So I'm excited to have Dottie on this panel. And then there's John from WFIU. And we know he loves Tab. They're no longer making Tab. We know that about him, but he also has some stage talents. So ask him sometime when you get him aside about his stage talents, in addition to all the radio expertise that he does. And then there's Stacy from WFYI, who from the very first moment I met her, her enthusiasm and her energy for public media and just for life in general is really an inspiration. So thank you, Stacy, for joining this panel. And I can tell you that all of these folks were selected for reasons because they've got some expertise and some knowledge about production that I think will be an inspiration. The panel will be moderated and led by Dr. Phil Hoffman from Ball State Public Media. And he came to us from Florida. And okay, I have a confession. He is now one of my most favorite IPBS board members. But don't worry, Greg Gitzy, you're still one of my favorites, okay? So that you can both be my favorites, all right? So I think that covers pretty much everything. Just make sure your microphones are muted until you're ready to talk so we can eliminate background noise. Submit questions verbally, ask them out loud when you have one, or raise your hand or let us know you've got a question, or you can put it in the chat if you prefer. I'll share the email addresses of our participants in the chat for follow-up you might want to do. We are recording this, and it will be available on the IPBS website for those who could not attend. So thank you again, and take it away, Dr. Phil.
Thank you, Barb. I see Mark has joined us this morning. And Mark, I don't know if you want to say hello before we get started.
Sure, happy to say hi and welcome to everybody as well. This is initiative we've undertaken to assist in your professional development and to also sort of expand just the opportunities to interact with one another. We're connected by many miles of physical space, but the internet allows us to connect in a very direct way. And just want to thank Barb for taking the time and expending such tremendous energy in pulling this webinar series together. It really seems to have benefited many of you, and it's an initiative we look to continue doing as we go forward. So thank you very much for doing that, Dr. Phil. Appreciate you taking the leadership of this particular panel here and moderating things, and take it away.
Thank you, Mark. Well, I thought if we could, panelists, we'd start with sort of current state review. I think it's always helpful to kind of talk about just what is happening right now in local production in everybody's shop. So why don't we start, Paul? If you're willing to start, we can talk a little bit about kind of what's happening now. What is the state in your shop?
Oh, thanks. Hey, thanks everyone for being here. I mean, I think it's very important that we have these webinars to connect, and like Mark said, physical distance. This allows us to do this. At our place, it's kind of, we do a number of different productions here. We do 6 local programs, for the most part weekly, and 2 to 3 documentaries a year. And I think the challenge for us, and maybe many of you as well, is that where do we go from here? Because we've had kind of the TV model was the thing. Now we're dealing with streaming. We're dealing with digital. We're dealing web, social media, and everything else. How do we get there and do the multi-platform approach? So that's something we're really diving into here, is how to be relevant in all those mediums. And with us, it's just that we're kind of in a hybrid mode right now. We're trying to do a little bit of each, but like I said, we do 6 local programs. One of the things we do that we're really proud of is we do an education program that Greg Gitsy, our GM here, thinks that it's probably the only one in the state of Indiana. It's a 25-minute, half-hour program, and maybe even one of the few in the state is dedicated strictly to education. So our facility is basically the education model. We are all about education, which I think a lot of us are, but that's what we're focused on. And as far as, like I said, our programs that we do, we're looking to see what things are relevant. Some of the programs that we've been on the station I've been here almost 6 years, and are they still relevant? That's something we're trying to focus on too, is where do we go from here with relevancy? Our programs make a difference. But
Yeah,
so let's a little talk about where we're at here.
I will say, just my observation, I've been around the country in a lot of states, and it seems like everybody is kind of in that position. There aren't that many stations that you could really say have made significant changes, at least that I've observed. Stacy, why don't we talk a little bit about in Indy, sort of what the state of local production is in Indy right now, and kind of where you guys sit in that transition.
I feel a little weird talking about it since I'm not in production, but I do work with Kyle Travers, who heads our production team. And, 2 things that I'm excited that we have been working on is we have established a digital short series called Simple Civics. And it lives first on our website, 3 to 5 minute video shorts that explain civics lessons. They're kind of geared toward kids, but honestly, they're for anyone. They're really cute and engaging. But what's been great about that I've seen them do is we've created kind of like a brand that we can like pop in. So you can find like kind of civics lessons almost in anything. So we've been able to create like mini seasons, like 6 to 8 episodes. We did 2 Simple Civics episodes tied to themes that were, apparent in Harriet Tubman documentary and in the Frederick Douglass documentary. So we've been able to do a couple of things like that. And I think that this is for public consumption. We are launching our Across Indiana series as a digital short series as well. So what I'm observing our team doing is kind of trying to think about things in those like kind of smaller consumption platforms. And when I say we're doing digital first, we'll create a 3 to 5 minute digital short series, but then Kyle creates like 2-minute, even shorter shorts that we will air on television as interstitials. And then we create social media reels too. So that's all pretty new for us. But what I appreciate from a sponsorship perspective is that the sponsor like logo inclusion is in all of those spaces. My dream is that we can get there with audio too, and create audio shorts.
All right.
Oh,
Thank you,
and thank you,
Stacy.
Pam Elliott shared the link to Simple Civics. You all should check it out. It's very, I'm a huge fan of it. It's so good.
Well, we all love to steal from one another, right? So that's great. Thank you. So, Dottie, you want to talk a little bit about where Ball State PBS is?
Sure. So we are kind of in a transition phase, like Paul said. We do local shows. We do about 4 to 5 regular local shows, and then some specials around the holidays. One of our ones that we really like around here is now entering. It's kind of like the Our Town series that a lot of you have done. We're on our 15th town. But like I said, we're in a transition of going digital first. So what does that look like? What platforms do we want to use? What are our buckets of content that we want to focus on? So that's kind of where we're at right now. Is what does that look like? And from a production point, it's a little different because you're not thinking 28:46 or 26:46. You're thinking, like Stacy said, in little chunks of you can do 5 minutes, you can do 2 minutes, and what does that look like for your audience? So that's kind of where we're at right now.
All right, John, bring us home. I know you don't have any tab, but you look like you're awake. So, what's
Yeah.
the state in Bloomington?
Well, we're not strangers by any means to cross-platform exploration. We've been doing it for quite some time. Trying to consciously come up with ways that we could extend our brands, our program brands. We produce a lot of short and long form stuff, and to extend the lives of the existing content that we have. And we're trying in judicious ways to do that with certain properties. A Moment of Science has been around since 1988. It started as a 2-minute weekday broadcast module, and modules don't really fit into linear broadcast as neatly as we might think. But it's a great podcast length, good digestible daily podcast, and it does really well on demand in terms of claiming our web traffic. 1.5 million views to A Moment of Science web posts a year. And we've extended that in recent years by doing some PBS grant-funded digital studios videos. And in the last couple of years, we opened a TikTok account for Amos. I never thought I'd see public radio, public media find its way to TikTok, but it did, and it's been moderately successful for us. Basically doing the same thing, but with a different host who brings a different approach, still kind of in that explainer mode, addressing one question at a time per piece in a more robust way. There are some things, especially in Radioland, where I mainly dwell, that are very legacy media focused and probably will predominantly continue to be. I'm thinking about our CD spin, not just live hosted CD spin, but the weekly music shows that we produce and distribute. I don't see those going on TikTok because I don't see the audience for those shows going on TikTok. But it does make sense in places where the audience might be able to follow or expect to, or be pleased to find us there.
So it sounds like, I think in summary, with everybody's sort of in this transition at some point, right? Maybe you've got one foot in both camps in terms of linear streams and digital shorts, and maybe some people the stride is more leaning towards digital shorts. But it sounds like everybody's kind of in the middle of this transition, which is pretty typical, what you see across most stations. So what I wanted to do, and I thought we could watch a short 2-minute video, so a short digital video that I think will be a good thing for the panelists to react to. This is sort of a part of a study that was done by Deloitte, looking at the future of media in general. And they've kind of come up with 4 quadrants in their study. It's very interesting, and we have a link that Barb will send out so you can go to the study. But this one is sort of the worst case scenario for us. So I thought, let's start there, and we'll go with the bad news, and then we'll move forward from that. So this is talking about the future of TV where broadcasters really have not effectively participated.
In this scenario, a few global digital platform companies have taken over the leading role in aggregation and distribution from national broadcasters. They control the entire TV and video market and have entered all steps along the value chain. Similar to large supermarkets, each of the digital platform companies offers an extensive range of global and national content, only differentiated by some exclusive productions and sports rights. Broadcasting as we know it today has disappeared. Since video content is distributed over uniform all-IP networks, broadcasters went through a painful process of change and evolved into pure creators of national content. Mainly the consumer demand for relevant content, like news or local formats, saved their existence. At the beginning of the market transformation process, consumers were overwhelmed by the quantity of content available and the proliferation of content providers. That confusion quickly evolved into frustration. Subsequently, global digital platform companies exploited their technological capabilities to develop smart selection and recommendation, supported by artificial intelligence. Advertising, as well as consumer relationships, has also shifted to the digital platforms. Broadcasters are dependent on the revenue shares from digital platform companies and cut off from direct paid content and advertising revenues. Advertising agencies and traders have disappeared, rendered irrelevant by digital platforms' direct models of ad trading. In this scenario, regulators did not take significant steps to monitor and control the digital platform companies' market strength. From the regulator's perspective, the digital platforms are doing a decent job in catering for different cultural tastes and in providing local quality content.
So, as I say, that's not necessarily our friend, but I'm just curious, panelists, as you listen to that, what parts of that ring true to you, and what parts of it do you have questions about or concerns about in terms of whether or not it's accurate? Anybody want to take a crack at it?
Yeah, well, yeah, up front they said, more or less, and I may not be verbatim here, but the broadcast as we know it is dead, and I guess as we know it is an important qualifier. I don't think any of us really is poised to turn off the transmitter anytime soon. I expect to be in the industry another 20 years, and the transmitter's still going to be humming then, I believe. Many fewer people will be interfacing with us, especially, I think, on the TV side with linear broadcast. I think the writing's already on the wall for linear broadcast television. But radio, I think, is a little bit different just because of use habits and because no technology changes really in a meaningful way have been foisted upon radio listeners. So, it's really easy for us, I think, to brandish the digital lipstick and maybe to over apply it, but we still have a lot of touch points the old-fashioned way. I think that's where most of our, literally most of our tune-ins are happening still on the radio side. By maybe an 8-to-1 or 9-to-1 ratio is through good old-fashioned linear broadcast receivers.
Other thoughts? Anybody else have thoughts about that?
I think that's been the challenge, and it will continue to be the challenge. Is television has been the king for so long. How do you slowly? I don't think, like John said, I don't think it'll ever disappear. But there's just so many ways to watch our content now, and people's attention spans. Just from my, I've been in this business almost 37 years now, and the 30-second commercials disappearing, even the 20-second commercials disappearing, or underwriting ad, wherever you want to call it. And that's why digital shorts for social media, for web, for everything, really have to become a thing, relevancy to kind of pair with television. And I always think about multi-platform approach, and you've got to, and even more now than it ever was. I mean, I saw multi-platform approach starting to happen 10, 15 years ago. I think it's really even more important now. Television still is going to be there, but people are watching content so many different places, and the attention span is there. I mean, and the competition's there. And I said this before, the streaming services, or the Netflixes of the world, our local production, what we're going up against. So I think we need to figure out a way to keep in mind that television is still king and relevant, But like the thing that resonated with me is it's slowly fading away, and the platform is going to be um, more even as we move forward. And my kids are in their 30s and 20s. As we move forward, that's what they'll be watching. So hopefully that makes sense. But it's you with us here. It's like, okay, how do we step into this new world, well, newish world, and continue growing our television audience, but also get those viewers that are watching on our TV viewers, get them to the digital world too. And that's, I think, is at least for us, the challenge of what programs are still relevant. And we had an outdoor program that the host retired on. Well, she agreed to do digital shorts for us. So we do go straight to the web with that. Our education show is digital first. And that gives people a lot of opportunity to see it in a different way.
That's definitely going to be a transition that we are not in control of in some ways. I think there are a couple points in that video that I would question. One of those points is, while we all understand on demand is very critical, if you look at what's happening in streaming, free advertising supported streaming is a really growing product, and that's one of the things that you look at Netflix, for example. They've kind of maxed out globally at the subscription model. And so they need live linear streams that they can bundle that have lower or no cost in some other countries to continue to get market penetration. And they're desperately trying to get that model set up and running. So I think, many times it's kind of like radio, right? How many times has radio been dead in the last century? It's been dead a lot. And yet there it is. So I do think there's value in the linear stream. In fact, there was a period of time this summer where YouTube was bragging about they were going to start presenting curated content streams, which, I read as, oh, television channels. Great. Thank you. So I think there's definitely still the appetite for people to have that experience that's a less active experience. It's not as dominant as what it was, as you said, Paul, but it's definitely out there. So as we look at the future of all this, it's really what we're really talking about from a production perspective is platform delivery, format and structure and things like that. What does that do to you all as production people in terms of thinking about the kinds of tools you need, the kinds of formats you need to address, and how you evolve your workflow to accommodate that? Any thoughts about the pieces, parts of actually making the transition that you need to really be effective at?
I don't want to dominate this here, but years ago when I first started, you had to figure out, okay, we're going to go straight to television and maybe do like a radio break off of that. We'll just they add in a different way. Now you have to really think about where your content's going to go. And that's I'm not going to say it's a challenge, but it's like, where do we go with this? Are we strictly to the web? Are we strictly to Facebook or social media? Do we do television, or do we do it all? And we may not have the resources or the amount of people to be able to do something like that. And I just think that you have to really think hard about your audience more than ever. Think about what they want instead of what we want. I mean, I worked in promotions for a while too, so you have to think about what does the audience really want. And that's something that's more, I'm not going to say it's a challenge, but I think it's something that really has to be under consideration from the very get-go about any project you take on.
When you think about the resources, I mean, it's not just the number of people you have, it's maybe the kind of people you have and how nimble they are with different kinds of cross-platform production. I'd mentioned our Moment of Science producer, our web producer who got us on TikTok. Well, that was one of the things that drew us to her because she already had her own TikTok account with a 5-figure following. She was kind of an influencer for reasons completely unrelated to public media, but she knew what things to do to attract eyeballs. And not everybody is cross-trained in that way. I mean, yes, our newsroom is converged and everybody pretty much can go out and shoot a story, interview people, capture audio, bring back all the footage, edit audio and video for radio and TV and web, and tweet it all out. But there are other emerging platforms for which maybe we don't have the standards of the discipline in place. They just really haven't been integrated yet. And TikTok would be one of those.
Yeah, we recently launched a TikTok channel. I will admit the first video, our talent was running around with a lavalier mic in their hand asking questions. And so I had to consult my daughters. I'm like, what is this about? Why is she holding the microphone like that? And they said, oh, Dad, that's cool. That's the tiny mic. You just don't know. So, yeah, you're exactly right, John. I mean, those are things where the style is inherently different and you need a person that understands what works in that venue. So Dottie, do you mind talking a little bit about, one of the things I know you've had experience in here at Ball State is you went through the EMDD program and talked a lot about transmedia and building out everything around a content piece. How do you think about that?
Actually, it was Sarah that went through that, but actually, I was going to talk about that a little bit because Sarah and I have been talking about, transmedia. It's not just taking, so you do something for broadcast. It's not just taking that same content and putting it on TikTok and putting it on YouTube and putting it on this platform. You actually, as a producer, then have to start thinking about, okay, I've got this content that I can use on broadcast. Now, what can I use related to that, but it's different content for TikTok, different content, but the same, has to do with the same thing on my YouTube channel. So transmedia is kind of a whole different style of thinking of not using the same content on every platform, but what content can you pull out and add to for the other platforms to get those eyeballs. It was interesting. We're working on starting digital studios here at Ball State PBS, and we're working with a TCOM class that one of the instructors was very interested in getting their students involved in creating content for digital. And so we went in and talked to that class, and he said, so how many of you watch PBS or know any PBS shows? Out of 30 people, nobody raised their hand. So these 18 to 22-year-olds, nobody's watching public media. And he's like, what's the last time you watched? And they're like, oh, well, I watched, Sesame Street. And so it's something that it's been talked about in the industry as we have the kids when they're young, and then we lose them when they're in college age. So what types of content do they want, and where do they watch their content? A majority of those students said, yeah, if it was on YouTube, that's where I'm getting a lot of my content is YouTube. And then talking to them about, well, what things do you want produced that you would actually watch? So that was an interesting conversation that we're continuing to kind of figure out what kind of content do they want to watch, and where are they getting that content from? What are the platforms that we should be focusing on? Because you can't focus on every platform.
Yeah.
And they've got new platforms coming every year.
If you made a lot of investment in Vine back in the day, that was, there you sit. So I'm going to ask Stacy a question real quick, but if you want to start populating questions in the chat, please do. We'll switch around here and start taking your questions. But Stacy, can you talk a little bit about all this new digital platform stuff and how sponsors and supporters are viewing it? And also, I'm just curious from your perspective, I've always hated Nielsen ratings and been very unhappy with them. I'm just curious with digital numbers if you feel that's better or not as good or similar. So, do you want to take a crack at both of those, Stacy? Talk about the sponsor reaction and sort of the metrics that you get.
Yeah, I was thinking about that video and like kind of sponsorship perspectives on digital content. But actually, like on linear TV, let's start there. I think now we're kind of at this place when we meet with people who are in marketing, who are making marketing decisions, who are maybe 30, and you try to talk to them about PBS, and they just like blank stare at you, right? It's so you have to do a lot more work in order to get them to understand. I have found, because we are a dual license, I look at like our overall sponsorship number, and a majority of that money that we are raising is on radio and digital. We actually this year, our fiscal year just ended, but our fiscal year 2022, we actually raised more money in digital sponsorships than we did television sponsorships. Now, I see opportunity there because I 100% agree. Like there is still a TV audience, and actually, I keep telling my team, like, our TV audience is bigger than our radio audience, right? Like, there's still so many people there, but it's such a steeper hill to climb with some of those people who are holding the marketing dollars, because they don't even know what TV is, right? They just don't even know. So where I've found some like exciting opportunities are like around like sponsorship of those digital shorts, where we are able to create a package that is, like $5,000 for a 6 to 8 episode sponsorship, and it includes on-air support. And so we've had some good success with those kinds of opportunities. But what I find is also interesting. Okay, I think I answered one question. How are sponsors reacting to potential change in platforms? Like, I think people are excited. I think people think about it like not as a change in a platform. I think they think about it as like a new opportunity. So I think that's kind of how we are talking about it also to potential sponsors. Is we don't even say, we say this is a digital release that will also be on television. Nielsen, right? So people are interested around digital. Like, I think that Google Ads, right, and like Facebook, et cetera, there's like all of this direct access to so many metrics, like at the click of a button. You can essentially pull a report and see impressions and things like that. So I think people are interested in those kinds of things. I think you can still tell a co-branding story. And I don't know anybody else who is here, Mary Ann, if you guys have anything to throw into this, like, I don't know, like click-through rates, impressions, like people are asking us for those kinds of things. I think a challenge that we have is like capacity sometimes. So we'll create like a digital release and we'll be talking to the team and we're like, okay, we're going to do these 5 things. But then it becomes like a timing and capacity issue because we only are so many people. And so what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing from like some of our content teams are like, how do we think about changing our whole production schedule? How do we think about who's doing what jobs? What does marketing do versus what do our production teams do? So it's kind of like a landscape of non-actual production work, like things that I've observed.
No, that's awesome, and it's very helpful. I always love to hear what you're hearing out in the field from sponsors, because that's
Mm-hmm.
very helpful to think about as we talk about these things. Pam put a question in the chat. I don't know if you've all seen it. I love this question though. She's talking about sort of narrowing your focus a little bit. So think of the Hallmark Channel as the example that she gave of like, instead of us having this really broad tent in public media, should we think about narrowing the focus a little bit? And is that even possible? And then sort of a second piece to this, talking about pledge programs and doing year-round more a mission statement and not pledge drives. So anybody want to take a crack at either half of that, narrowing the focus or change to pledge drives?
I'm just gonna make an observation on our television, like on our channel. Our cooking programs do insanely well. Like we get the ratings, and regularly, if you look at just like overnight ratings, our cooking programs are in our top 10 almost every single week. And what I keep telling my team is like, people are watching live. So they're going to see our sponsor messages and they feel good while they're watching cooking programming. It's not depressing. It's lovely to watch. So I see like a huge opportunity there, but kind of to that idea of like narrowing, it's like every Saturday we have like a 3-hour block and it's cooking programming. And so I'm seeing that work. I'm trying to capitalize on that. But that's just an example from.
Yeah, I know WNET with the pledge question. WNET in New York tried that model, and I don't know what their success has been over the last year, but they sort of went to this model of they were constantly pledging, but only sort of on the weekends, and it was a very different messaging point and not as gift oriented kind of thing, more mission oriented. And I think the goal was to try to ascertain whether or not they could generate the same revenue stream. Now, granted, that's New York City. That's a different animal for most of us. But nonetheless, I mean, there are people that are trying these experiments. And when I was in Missouri, we were part of that. Do you guys remember Pledge the Core activity? It was a noble experiment that was a colossal failure, at least for us, where you would do exactly what it sounds like. Your pledge programs would be during core programming. You wouldn't interrupt your usual programming, and earned significantly less during that. So the thing that I always struggle with is we know we hear this negative feedback about pledge as it sits, and yet I do believe there is a portion of our audience that really kind of likes those shows and they don't mind when we go to those things. So it's a little bit of a challenge for sure when it comes to pledge and sort of changing audience behavior that is long ingrained. There are a couple of comments in the chat too about Nine Networks TikTok, sort of talking about the TikTok channel there that they've done and about 11,000 subscribers for that. You know, I would be curious your thoughts, panelists, on TikTok. I really struggle with TikTok. They are very renowned for being voracious data hogs and almost to the point of being scary in terms of the data they collect. And yet, I don't know that we can afford not to be there. So anybody have a perspective on? Yeah, John, go ahead.
Well, I don't really have a perspective on TikTok's data collection strategies, but in terms of the audience they serve, they tend to land in this zone that is kind of between, it's in that gap that public media doesn't really consistently serve. You know, there are kids under what, maybe 12 who are served by, PBS and member station children's programming. And then on the other side, you don't really see content for people who are, say, much under 35, who are not, in the audience that we know we have, people who are educated and affluent and stakeholders in their community. So there's that gap in there for college age people, teenagers, young adults that we're really not serving. Back to Pam's point about targeted audience being the answer for TV. Should we provide this wide variety of programs? I think that's an existential crisis for public TV in particular to confront. Because PBSs or stations are a little bit History Channel, a little bit Discovery, a little bit Bravo, a little country, a little rock and roll, a little of a whole lot of things, and no one thing. And it certainly would make more sense as radio has focused its format, on squarely on news and in almost every market, and to an extent on certain music genres. It would make more sense for TV to format in some ways, but there's also the question of mission. Are we really going to super serve one audience fragment, or are we going to try to be kind of something for everybody in a non-paywall public airwaves context?
I think also, we're at local production. It also depends on where you're at, what your audience wants. So you may want to say, yes, PBS, we want to focus on this, but even in Indiana, there's different, in all of our different areas, there's different focuses that we may be really good at or that our audience really wants. So thinking locally too, and locally, if we put it up on digital, anybody can see it, but then the core audience that you're serving, what are their needs? So do you hyper focus on that, or are you thinking more regionally or more of a broader area when you think of do we focus just on these certain topics? I think is something that as a producer you want to think about.
Yeah, and I will say, if you're not looking at the chat, there are some tremendous things happening in chat now. So I'm going to try to address a couple of those. So one of the things Greg pointed out is he pointed the streaming numbers out here, and it's been a while back, so you might have to scroll up a little bit. But the streaming numbers are not huge. And so when you think about, and this is what we talked about earlier, right? It's completely true. I think it was Stacy that was mentioning, like, we still have a substantial over-the-air audience. We still do. People are watching, and so I think the thing I struggle with is just because the numbers are small now doesn't mean that this isn't the way we need to go. right? And that's the place where I'm stuck. So what are your thoughts about, that point of, we're not getting the numbers right now in streaming. So does that mean it's less important, or do we just have to have focus and patience there?
I think part of the problem too, and we saw it during the pandemic, is people don't have the access across the whole area. So, data casting, we had, people don't, some of the rural areas still don't have the access to be able to stream in their home. They have to go to the library, have to go somewhere where they can get that access. So I think there's a larger population than what we're thinking that really doesn't have access. So they rely on that free over the air broadcast as well. So I think to totally go digital, it's a bigger problem than that we can fix, but getting that broadband access to everyone, that they're going to be able to get that streaming into their house or.
Well, we certainly can see that I always liken it to, at the airport, they have the people movers and you step onto it and it's always kind of a little bit of you got to be careful with that first step. And so with regard to our transition to digital, I always sort of feel like it's like approaching one of those, but it's going 20 miles, right? You got to get on it. It's going to help you move faster, but wow, you really have to figure out how to do this so that you don't crash and burn. And that's kind of the way I feel about this transition to digital. It seems to me like that's not really an option for us to say, oh, we don't need to do it or we shouldn't do it. But it's tricky to say the least. There's a lot of stuff to consider in this. I'm wondering too, if we can talk a little bit about, I always think about if I'm working in production, one of the things I like to talk about, because I'm a nerd, is gear. How does the change to the world of podcast or digital shorts and this kind of delivery, how does it impact what you need to be successful? Does it fundamentally change these things, John?
I think the biggest variable of the last 3 years has been the pandemic. I think of necessity, we stopped using studios for certain things, live shots, for instance. On the radio side, Noon Edition went entirely to Zoom and stayed that way. That's our weekly Friday call-in show. The hosts and guests alike were all on a Zoom call, and we routed that through the board. And it was that way for about 2 years. And we have returned to the studio to an extent, but we've continued to integrate Zoom. And that's been good for us because it's allowed us to easily bring in guests from all across the country who are experts on that week's topic. But that was strictly from necessity in our case. And I think a lot of that happened in media during that time. And it was allowed because it was good enough. It was deemed to be good enough. So there's a lot of kind of degraded, lossy audio and video artifacts there, and it's cheap, it's easy, and it's considered in certain contexts anyway sufficient.
Yeah, that's another part that I really struggled with early in the pandemic, John. I'm not going to lie, was this notion of like, oh, we're just going to put Skype calls on the air now. Okay. Ordinarily I would have never approved that. And Dottie's heard me, this is a big harangue with me too, that she's heard multiple times. People will often say to me, well, the iPhone's every bit as good as a real camera. And I'm like, oh, do not say that to me, right? I have a very strong opinion about that. So how about you, Dottie, in terms of gear? Does all this digital stuff and the shorts, does it fundamentally change what you need or not as much?
I don't think so. I with you. When I first saw that TikTok and saw that we did and had the microphone, I was just like So I mean, but again, our audience, if they're used to it and they don't care, but I kind of want to hold to a higher quality standard. But I don't think gear. You go out and shoot. You put your stuff together, and you hold it to the standard that each station is going to hold it to, and that's I don't think going out and shooting on a good camera, that's I think important for the quality of what PBS is and what people expect of it.
Yeah, I would think anybody in production probably would have a similar kind of mindset. Paul, were you going to say something? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm just to piggyback what John was saying. we for the first time, I had 3 guests in the studio in 3 years. We opened our studio probably about, 4 or 5 months ago at very limited basis. We were doing like a hybrid Zoom in studio kind of thing, and that's going to be the future. It's going to be that hybrid model. We got guests from just like John said, all over the United States and in the world who are content experts. And I think people accepted the fact that they look at crappy Zoom video for the content. Now it's going to start getting back to the point where us personally, we want to be shooting the best quality we can. We don't want to be doing Zoom. We accept the fact that the Zoom is going to be part of our studio production. But as far as gear goes, gosh, there's so many options out there now to shoot. And, we have one show that's, it's a around town show called Experience Michiana. Well, that's a handheld camera. And now you got mirrorless DSLR, mirrorless cameras, the lighting gear. The cost is coming down on it too. The stuff's getting smaller, but we still want the quality. We still want those productions that make us look, fantastic. I think everybody in production will feel that way. We want the best of the best. But it's another tough thing too to think about. Okay, well, let me pose this question. Okay, I've been here, like I said, 6 years. How do you determine if your shows are relevant or still have longevity? Does it still mean anything to the viewer? How do you determine what shows to start new and lose the ones you've had, maybe legacy shows for 25, 30 years? That's a big question for us here, because we do so much local production that are people still watching? And then we have the numbers come out. It's like, well, we're getting a 1 rating. It's like, is it worth it? So I don't know. But it also comes down to the mission. This show, we're doing a political show. Okay, part of the mission is to connect the community with legislators. I don't know. I'm throwing a lot of just what ifs out there, but I just think, these are things we got to think about.
If only our jobs were easy, right? If only all this was easy. It's interesting, Paul, you bring that up, because we just did a survey of our sort of heavy users about our local content. And, results were really disappointing from my perspective, because folks mostly, if they even knew what the local shows were, they said, nah, I don't really ever watch that or experience that. So it's a real eye opener when you get that information. And you're exactly right. You got to consider mission, and whether, just because something isn't popular doesn't necessarily mean we shouldn't be doing it. So that's a great point. And again, there's so many great things in the chat right now. Greg pointed out earlier about streaming services and how we're sort of getting boxed out. So if you think about that video that we watched, and it's the big players like Google and everything else, and we're limited to one tiny sliver of their capacity, that's a problem, right? And then we're not on a lot of those other services currently for most stations. So it's one of those pieces where you've got to be thinking about what impact does that have. So as people shift, I can remember when YouTube TV started, people were poo-pooing it and saying it's not going to be anything, and they've just grown and grown and grown and grown. And so we are not, as a station, we're not there. So I have literally heard staff members telling people, well, just go buy an antenna. And I'm like, oh yeah, no, that's not the answer, right? I mean, we have to be in the place. Any friction for the viewer is going to prevent them from experiencing us. That's not what we want. So let's talk a little bit about, like, the importance from your perspective of local content being part of those bigger streams, whether it's NPR One or whatever. How important is that for us to be in those different places, Spotify and all that?
Well, I think let's go back to our earlier conversation. We can't ignore this. We can't say it's not there. I just remember years ago when, I keep saying that because I've been in business a long time, when, let's say Facebook or whatever, I never thought we'd be doing videos for Facebook or anything like that. I never thought we'd be doing videos for social media, but it's a real thing. And we can't ignore the fact that, yeah, maybe the numbers on streaming are low, but they're just going to keep growing and growing, because people just do not watch content traditionally anymore. I mean, all of us do it. I mean, I don't watch anything live hardly at all anymore. But I think as we move forward, we have to really start thinking about that stuff and be in that space. We really have to be in that space somehow. But how do you do it all? I mean, and Dottie said this too, you can't do it all. So it's small steps, I think. Okay, hey, we're going to do a digital series strictly to the web, nothing else. And
Yeah.
that's the audience we're looking for. TikTok, we're going after a younger audience, which PBS has notoriously never been able to get there. You got the kids watching the kids channel till 9 years old, and then the parents jump back on when they have kids in their 30s or 20s or whatever. But where that TikTok is a bridge right there, I believe. So that's just my thought. We just can't ignore what's going on in the world and where everything's going, because 20 years from now, who knows what it's going to be? I don't know if I'll be alive at that point, but you just don't know. But you have to think what our kids are going to be want. I mean, we want PBS to be a legacy for everyone, and the kids channel is the perfect ways to start that. But how do we keep that rolling to the teens or 20-year-olds or the generations they call them these days? But that's my 2 cents.
John?
I think more to the point, here in Bloomington, we want our PBS and NPR stations to be a legacy, not just PBS and NPR, but we need to be everywhere our area listeners expect us to be, including on platforms that you can tap into from anywhere. It has to go beyond broadcast, and it does. I think we're everywhere we sort of intuitively would expect people to be looking for public media content, and then beyond that a little bit. And I think that's a key to our survival. We simply have to position ourselves with local content alongside the national, or else we'll get lost. That content's got to be produced, it's got to be there, and it's got to be distributed all over, or else the national will eat our lunch, I'm afraid. The NPR network is maybe threatening to do that as we speak.
Yeah.
Well, and
It's a
just
whole
to
other.
pull that through, just to pull that through a little bit further too, I think getting into the practice of also counting all of those places where we are. So, when we look at like our digital shorts or any sort of local content that we're releasing, like you have to look at how it does via like, your TV audience, your tune-in audience, but also how many views did it get on PBS On Demand? How many views, on so when I'm pulling together like our like total kind of reach of small studio sessions, like I'll look at one session and you have to look at it in 6 or 7 different places. And so putting a process in place to really talk about what your total audience is when you're looking at a local program, I think is really important, because it's really easy to look at like the 2,500 people who tuned in on Friday night at 8 p.m., but that is not telling the whole story. Yeah. So what mechanisms do you put in place working with your marketing and development teams to be able to tell that whole story, so then we can sell that whole story? It's just something that we've been thinking about.
Somebody that's, I think, done a great job with that is, you may want to reach out to them, Connecticut Public. They have a report that they do that's exactly that. It's aggregating all that information. It's called a tonnage report. So it takes Facebook impressions and YouTube views and over the air and every piece of the puzzle and tries to aggregate it into a unified way of looking at audience. So it was really interesting to see how they do that. And as you can imagine, Stacy, that's a lot of work. Pull that stuff together is a lot of work. Okay, I want to take 2 minutes now for another video, if you all don't mind, because I started with the bummer and the depressing video. But wait, one of the 4 scenarios that Deloitte has pitched is not a bummer and depressing for broadcast television. So I want to take a look here at another piece that they had. It's called, fortunately enough for us, The Revenge of the Broadcasters. So let's take a couple minutes to look at that.
In this scenario, national broadcasters have successfully accomplished digital transformation and secured a strong position in the TV and video ecosystem. Broadcasters have evolved into digital platforms and have established direct customer relationships and deliver on-demand content. During the transformation process, broadcasters developed excellent digital capabilities and entered the cognitive era in key domains such as targeted advertising and recommendation functions. National broadcasters and global digital platform companies coexist in the market guaranteeing a high richness of content. Whilst national broadcasters focus on local quality content, digital platform companies supply global productions and blockbusters. Viewers can choose whether they want to watch linear or nonlinear content from global or national sources. Also, technological alliances have shaped the market. National all-IP network operators helped broadcasters during the transformation process with their expertise in digital media distribution and leveraging customer data. The alliance resulted in an efficient distribution of content via high-performance platforms with smart access to customer data for the broadcasters. The collected user data would be an effective enabler for fully personalized advertisement. But advertising is part of a strong regulatory framework with strict data privacy rules. Advertising agencies remained in the market and helped broadcasters to implement innovative ads within the legal guidelines. Broadcasters also benefit from strong media regulation at a national level, as local content production enjoys firm regulatory support. The strict national and European regulatory regime is the answer to the threat of globally dominating digital media companies. With corresponding measurement systems, broadcast industry bodies have secured a strong national media industry.
So they're basically saying there is hope in that video. Again, Barb put the link to the whole thing in there. So there's two other quadrants that they talked about as well. Just interesting viewing for you if you're interested in where this is all headed potentially. So I know we're almost out of time. I just want to kind of do a round robin real quick with each panelist. If you want to just summarize your view of local content in the future, what advice, what hope, what thoughts do you have? Just real quick. So let's start with John. John, what is our future, John?
The future is good storytelling. I think that's important. It starts there. It doesn't start with, oh, we need to do a podcast because everyone's doing a podcast, or we need to be on TikTok or Snapchat because everybody's there. The whole Me Too thing isn't really working in terms of engaging with listeners. It starts with good content first, and that will always win.
Content is king, as they say. Dottie, how about you? What do you see in the future?
Well, I agree with John. Storytelling is what we're good at. That's why local content, local storytelling. That's why people turn to us, is because they aren't going to see their story told anywhere else. So, but just quickly, Pam had asked about collaboration. I think that's important too going forward, is collaborating among the production units in the state and helping each other try to get that local content produced. And how can we help each other get to where we need, and then looking at other ways our content can be used. So one of the ideas that I saw on Neighborhood that I really want to try is there was a station that they advertised with their local arts. So at their orchestra concert, they advertised in their program. They put a QR code, and they're putting content for people to look at that QR code in that program. So that's something I want to try here to see, what kind of content will people look at, if they're just sitting waiting for the concert to start, and how does that work? So just different ways that our content, not just streaming, but the different ways that we can get content out there.
Stacy, how about you from a corporate support perspective?
I think I'm just going to plug it with all of my content friends here. I think bringing in sponsorship and marketing people at the start of conversations around ideas that you have for content that you are producing, to give that time to try to find sponsorship for the work that you want to do is always really important. We, have established a monthly meeting where Kyle Travers and Roxana Caldwell and Kirsten and I sit down as like marketing and sponsorship and our leaders over radio, or I should say audio and video content. And we just like talk about what's on the horizon. And so creating a space where that doesn't feel like scary, right? And it feels collaborative is, I think, super important.
Great. All right, we're going to have Paul bring it home for us real quick, though. If you haven't had a chance to look at the chat, you might want to open it up, copy and paste it, because Pam and Karen, and there's just a lot of Brent has a lot of really smart comments in there. So I would encourage you all to copy it and hang on to it. So Paul, with a minute left,
Yeah.
what's our
So it's
future?
like following Jerry Seinfeld. I mean, everything's been said, but it always comes down to storytelling and then content. And that what differentiates us from commercial stations is local production. We can do things, we can tell stories in a different way. We can do longer versions of stories. We can do documentaries. All that is what makes us different and much more valuable too. But community connections still got to be there. Still got to reach out to the people that watch our station so they feel connected with what they're doing. And like I said, we do our town here. They do one over there, is a really nice one as well. And those are the things that kind of get people involved and feel like they're part of our station. We can't forget television where we're at, but we also got to remember that streaming and digital is the future, and we have to figure out ways to get to that point. But that's where I see the future. But it's going to come down to content and storytelling every time, local production making that huge difference.
Well, thank you, Paul. All right, everybody. How about a hand for the panelists? Very good comments. So thank you all for doing this morning. Thank you, Barb, for making it happen, and for Mark for always being there for us in IPBS. That's it for me this morning. I'll turn things back over to Barb and Mark.
Mark Newman, please.
Well, again, just I want to say thank you, and this is such an important conversation to have, a panel topic to have. From an IPBS perspective, we are in the early stages right now of doing just what you all have been talking about, developing a proof of concept pathway based for how a video first product, a digital first product, I should say, that can be used across platforms can be established, and that standards can be established for continuing to follow that particular pathway so that we all have content that we can share in, and most importantly, that it does meet that local standard, number one, and number two, that it results in more expansive statewide sponsorship and underwriting, which we all benefit. And then that vertical is able to kick in. More content, better storytelling, more funding to support it, more funding to support our stations, and we continue to roll from there. So the fact that you all are engaged and are thinking this way is huge. And I can't thank you enough for your participation. I can't thank Phil enough for leading this discussion and our panelists for thoughts. The questions in the chat, those need to be memorialized. Excellent. Great stuff. I cannot tell you, well, I am telling you how happy I am that this has taken place. So thank you, everybody, for giving your time to be a part of this today.
And that concludes this webinar. So thank you. To be continued.